My wife and I were married for 8 years. For our entire relationship, we had a third wheel, so to speak. I never thought of Mike that way before, but very recently, everything changed for the three of us. We were best friends from a young age and grew up roaming around our town together. All three of us worked our first job together. When I realized my wife wanted to become more than friends, I told our third wheel, my best friend Mike, about her advances. We were in our 20s at the time. My wife and I hadn't even started dating. He was really supportive of us and swore to me that he didn't see her in a romantic light, so there was no competition or problem. After we got married, he became our handyman. I was never good with tools, but I made great money as an accountant for a big business company. We bought our own house in our mid-20s, and I thought our relationship was everything it needed to be. I made home videos showing our life how it was, and even introduced my sleepy, grumpy wife as the love of my life. Something seemed to be bothering her by the time we were married for 5 years. As much as I tried to talk through whatever was happening with her, she never opened up to me about anything major that needed to change. All she did was correct me on little things she thought I could do better. She also frequently updated the list of things for Mike to check or fix around the house. Mike was soon to be engaged. I met his fiancée, and she seemed nice enough, but I didn't get to know her like Mike knew my wife. Mike was at our house all the time without his fiancée, whether he was fixing stuff for us while I was at work, or he was just over for a social visit when I was home. I never told him about the tension I was experiencing with my wife. I guess I was embarrassed and thought it was something I could fix. Even though I tried to improve how I did the dishes, drove, laundry, and cleaned, I catch her looking at me like she resented me. When I felt myself hesitating to look in her direction, I knew something had to give. She started leaving the house each day, about 15 minutes after I got home from work. At first, it was because she forgot something at the store, needed to see her mom, or something like that, but after a few days, she just stopped telling me where she was going. I got used to her leaving, and didn't care that I didn't know where she was going, because it was nice to get time where I didn't have to worry about meeting her scornful gaze. After she left one afternoon, I decided to do some snooping in her bedroom. I was cleaning while I did it, so she couldn't be upset with me if stuff was moved around. While looking under the bed, I found another cell phone. It wasn't old, and it was actually still on. There was no passcode on it. It just unlocked with the swipe of my finger. There was only one chain of messages on the phone, and it didn't take me long to realize they were between my wife and Mike. My best friend was texting my wife on a secret cell phone, and the messages were exactly what you'd expect to find if my wife and best friend could fully express their love without worry. I was devastated. My heart was racing, and it was hard to believe she was doing this to me. Not only that, but Mike was heartless enough to cheat on his soon-to-be wife, Julie, with his best friend's wife. Even though my wife had been looking at me with scorn, I never thought she would start an affair with my best friend. There were messages about their sex, all the times they met up, and how bad it would be if either me or Julie found out what they were doing. I found out their affair began even before Mike met Julie. He was basically marrying her as a bonus to the relationship he counted on the most, the one he had to keep secret. My wife actually said I wouldn't have the nerve to leave her even if I discovered their affair. She said if I found out, she'd still have to be the one to divorce me, and if I tried to weasel out of alimony payments, she could just ask one of her friends to lie about me cheating with her. Anger replaced my grief. I took screenshots of everything and sent it to my phone and email address. I didn't want her to know I found the phone, because I planned on exposing them before Mike's wedding, if neither of them came clean before that. She came home with rosy cheeks and a shy smile. She greeted me warmly, but it was like I could finally see that she was just putting on a show. I felt stupid for failing to notice it before, but she was an excellent actress, and I never thought she would be willing to put on a permanent act for her husband, the man she shared her life and home with. How could anyone with a sound mind put on an act where they should feel the most safe and natural? Why wouldn't she just divorce me and honestly admit she just didn't want to be married anymore? I knew it wasn't anything I could have helped, because I tried talking to her. I wanted to know whatever it was that was bothering her, even if it was about me. She kept our evening together short, and went to bed like everything was right with the world. I wanted so badly to wake her up and hear what excuses she'd for what I found. Mike was about to get married. That made it so hard to believe this was happening between them. Why did either of them feel like it was okay to be doing this? For the next 8 days leading up to my best friend's wedding, I asked myself these questions and more. I finally told my MIL the day before the wedding what was going on. She said it would probably be better for me to just keep my mouth shut, because they were adults and I would risk looking like a moron if I came forward with the evidence. She was only concerned about how much money the bride's family spent on the upcoming wedding and the judgment my wife would face for my accusations. But it wasn't just accusations, I had proof. She and Mike really were doing this, and I felt like the best and only decision for me was to show everyone the truth. So the next morning, during the wedding setup, I prepared the screenshots I took to display on the projector during their vows. I was supposed to be Mike's best man, even though he was sleeping with my wife. I hated everything I laid eyes on. It felt like I took the red pill and learned the truth about my reality. As my best friend stood at the altar with Jolie, my wife and I sat watching them, in the crowd of wedding guests. Suddenly, the first screenshot popped up. After everyone got a chance to read it, there was a collective gasp. That's when Jolie and Mike looked up. Then the slide changed, showing two images cropped side by side. Images Mike and my wife sent to each other. One was of his package, and the other was of my wife in lingerie, looking very welcoming for whoever was meant to receive the image. People were screaming and getting up to leave before the third slide came. It was two long messages, one from Mike, describing the things he wanted to do to my wife, calling her by name, and a response from her in kind. Jolie was silently sobbing, staring at Mike. She ran back down the aisle dramatically, and Mike looked straight at me. His eyes immediately dropped, and he sat down in the fetal position. I can only imagine how he felt at this moment. Maybe he felt as bad as I did. My wife got up to leave, but she was stopped by some guests and the bride and groom's parents. All but two people were talking, crying, or yelling. The two silent ones were my wife and Mike. They didn't have anything to say to the angry, hurt people surrounding them. I think they were in shock, but also knew that no matter what they said, it wouldn't matter. People left as soon as they came to accept that the wedding was off, and they weren't going to get any answers from the cheaters. Mike approached me and my wife. I was still there simply because I wanted to see if either of them would apologize to me. Mike told my wife that he didn't want to see her anymore. He said more, but as soon as he said he didn't want to see her anymore, my wife finally cracked. She sobbed and wailed. Mike turned to me and apologized for ruining my life. He left, and I left my wife at the church. She tried to come with me, but I told her to get her own ride. She didn't have her own car, so her mother had to pick her up from the church. Her and Mike dropped off the face of the earth, completely shunned by their friends and families, except for my ex-MIL. She let her daughter live with her, but she didn't hesitate to express her disappointment. After I decided to tell the truth, it was like she realized how bad it was. She messages me on Facebook, sometimes to tell me how I dodged a bullet divorcing my wife when I did, because she only became more disappointing. Thanks to my evidence, the divorce went extremely well for me. My ex was ordered to pay me alimony, and the judge called her despicable. OP, I am so sorry your wife started an affair with your best friend. It's even worse because your best friend did this too. They lived a lie and didn't care. They only worried about getting caught because they would be inconvenienced. Your wife even told Mike how low she was willing to go, making up disastrous lies in the event of a divorce. It's a lucky thing you found this phone. Thankfully, you didn't have to live through the terrible fate your wife planned for you. I don't believe they deserved any less than the confrontation you gave them. They ruined several lives by starting and hiding their relationship. You have a wonderful opportunity to start over new and practice the knowledge you've acquired. Thank you for sharing this story. Let's now get into our second story for today. My wife and I were married for 13 years. In the 8th year of our marriage, my brother was sentenced to 5 years in prison. At this point in our life, my wife and I both worked full-time, but it just so happened that she was off during visiting hours at the prison. I asked her to start visiting him for me once a week. She could video call me while she was there so I could see him, but it was hard for him to hear anything I said. I wrote him letters that she'd bring. I was able to get off work a few times to visit him, but it wasn't more than 5 times in 5 years. I felt bad, but my wife and I had an expensive mortgage, debt, and bills to pay. I also felt like it wouldn't make much of a difference if I visited him in person or sent my wife to visit on my behalf. She paid him a visit once a week until the day he got out. My wife started talking about him a little more closer to the time of his release. She was really concerned about him having a place to move into and asked several times if he could move in with us. I didn't feel comfortable with that. I knew that after 5 years in prison, my brother was going to need room to spread his wings and enjoy the company of a woman. Since I was financially stable, I got him an apartment nearby. My wife started going to his place any chance she got to bring him food or help keep his house clean. This is about the time I started to realize she was behaving more like a wife for him. I planned on talking to her about it, but my brother got to me first. While she was at work one day, my brother came over. I was surprised when he came right out and said I worked too much and was falling short of loving my wife. I asked him what he meant and why he was saying this. He said he got to know her quite a bit over the past 5 years, and she confided in him that she wished I worked less. I asked why she didn't feel like she could talk to me about it, and to that my brother just shrugged. He said it might be my fault she was so attached to him. I didn't like him saying that either. I didn't know how to respond. I knew he was hinting towards how I'd sent my wife all those times to see him in prison instead of going myself. After this interaction with him, my wife continued going to his apartment while I was at work. She never told me about these visits. When I asked her not to go over there anymore, she didn't even flinch. She continued visiting him until my brother admitted to it. I forbade her to go over there anymore, but that didn't make a difference. I still had to work, so she still got to see him. Whenever I was home, the house was full of tension. We both knew she was betraying me by continuing to visit my brother. We both knew I suspected them of sleeping with each other, but neither of them would admit to something like that. The tension was filled with silence. One day, I decided to surprise my wife. I convinced myself that she wasn't cheating on me because they couldn't do that to me. They loved and cared about me. Starting an affair should have been impossible due to the genuine concern for me that I thought they had. I loved my wife, so I bought her roses and her favorite chocolate on the way home. I entered the front door quietly and snuck up behind her as she stood at the kitchen table. She was holding her phone, looking through pictures of her and my brother. She stopped to stare at the picture of them kissing. In shock, I gasped. She turned around, so I slapped her with roses. I told her to get out and started frantically scooping her clothes out of the dressers and into trash bags. She was just crying as she packed her essentials in the bags I gave her into her car and left. I sold the rest of her things, including her collection of expensive purses. Of course, she went to live with my brother, and I found out they were in a sexual relationship since the day he got out of prison. For 3 months, my wife thought she was doing the right thing. She thought she could live happily ever after with my brother after our divorce was final. Not even a week after that, my brother was arrested and taken back to jail. He's facing another felony charge. My ex lost her mind. She couldn't stay in his apartment without him, so she started begging me for forgiveness. She said she knew she messed up, but this was just something that happened sometimes. It was no more than an unavoidable accident, and she swore now that this happened to her, she would never ever let it happen again. Around the same time, my brother was begging me from behind bars for money or lawyer representation. I knew both of them were only out for themselves. I knew that if I kept entertaining them, they would only ever take advantage and hurt me. So for the foreseeable future, I decided to cut them both out of my life. It was extremely difficult because I was left without any relationship to compare to the ones I lost. But I didn't lose them because of anything I did. I lost them because they weren't worth having. I did everything I could to involve myself in social events and family gatherings, even though I felt like secluding myself. It paid off because on the days when I couldn't bring myself to leave the house, I had people out there waiting for me. They reached out, and when I didn't respond, they'd pay me a visit in person. Sometimes that was what I needed. I met a guy that I'm happy to call my best friend. It might be cheesy, but I'm glad I survived this double betrayal. I didn't give up on life or quit my job, even though I heavily considered it. OP, what happened to you is devastating. I am so sorry your wife started an affair with your brother. It didn't matter that she was the one visiting him in prison. You trusted each of them, and they still went behind your back. You cared about your brother enough to send the love of your life to check on him and make sure he didn't feel alone or forgotten. I'm glad you refused to blame yourself for this. Neither of them behaved like your brother or wife, and you deserve better. I'm glad you found out the truth, even though it was devastating. You meant to find out the truth. And at least you did before your brother went back to prison. Your wife might have just gone back to being your wife until she found someone else to start an affair with. You've done good by surrounding yourself with others and refusing to give up. I wish you all the best. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's